with another one of our influence or process theories that's focused on servant leadership. And so again, just to kind of recap where we're at, after exam 2, we started talking about ethical leadership. And for the first time, we started bringing this idea of ethics and morality into the conversation about leadership, where we've added followers, we've added some context, but now we're starting to say that there is a difference between good and bad leadership, depending on ethics and morals that guide the decisions of leaders. So we talked about those ethical theories that kind of underlie a lot of what we talk about when we say someone's a moral leader or an ethical leader. And then what did we talk about after ethical leadership? What was like the first main influence theory or process theory? We watched the TED Talk about a guy. Transformational or transformative leadership theory. And we talked about, again, that it was kind of the first theory that really brought in morality. And it has 3 styles: transformational, transactional, pseudo-transformational. And that pseudo-transformational was connected with this idea of the dark side of leadership, or the toxic triangle, about how destructive leaders can get into power. So really interesting stuff there. And then we talked about authentic leadership on Thursday. So seems like a long time ago, but wasn't. What do y'all remember about authentic leadership?
I remember all kinds of things.
If we were to use a different word than authentic, what would we say? If we're wanting an authentic leader, we're wanting what kind of leader? Genuine. We're looking for a genuine leader. Okay, anything else you remember about authentic leadership?
There's a intrapersonal and interpersonal.
Intrapersonal, interpersonal, as well as what other kind of definition? Developmental. And so we have one big definition that kind of encompasses all of that, but then we have this practical model that helps us really understand kind of 5 key behaviors or characteristics of authentic leaders, and then what those outcomes are. And so again, just to kind of remind ourselves about these theories and how they differ from other things that we've studied is we're not really getting a prescription for what a leader needs to do or who they need to be. It's more about going in, observing what's happening, and describing what the leadership process looks like. And so if we go into an organization with an authentic leadership lens, we kind of use those components. We're looking for those characteristics or those behaviors to be there. And that can be among the leader, it can be among the followers. We kind of want to see the reciprocalness of those 2 things. Same thing with what we're talking about here with servant leadership today. Servant leadership, and I remember asking y'all too if you liked transformational or authentic leader better. And several of y'all kind of sided on, okay, I like authentic leadership. Some people liked transformational leadership. I'm interested to hear what you have to say today about servant leadership. It's another one of our process theories. And what's interesting is that, again, it's servant leadership, not servant leader. So it's about the process, and it's a paradox. When we say something's a paradox, what do we mean by that? It almost, when something's a paradox, it almost seems contradictory. There's like 2 parts of it that you can't have, like you can't have one without the other, but if you just look at them separately, they seem like they would be opposed to each other. And so the thing about servant leadership is that it is focused on this idea that it's all about service, so putting others first, while at the same time being influential. Why would service and influence seem opposed to each other?
Service is like you're supposed to do without anything in return. While influence, you still gain like this idea of power.
Exactly. We go back to our definition of influence from the very beginning of the semester, how it's connected to power and getting what you want. You're influencing people to get what you want. But yet service is about being selfless, right? So like, how can I want to influence people to do things I want them to do and still be selfless at the same time? So it seems counter, but that's what makes up servant leadership, is this idea that because people are selfless and serving others, it actually gives them more credibility. And that credibility is what leads to influence. And when I think about how people who are servant leaders or use servant leadership in how they lead, what power base do you think they gain with their followers? So they're having some type of influence, but what power base might it be connected to? Starts with an R. It's what causes you to do things for your grandma just because she's your grandma.
Relational.
Close.
Is it referent?
Referent. Yep. So think about it. We talked about how referent power is a personal power base, so people do things for you because they respect you. So how this is a paradox is that servant leadership, because you're serving others, you end up developing this influence because people develop respect for you because of the type of influence that you have over them. Does that make sense? So that's kind of the crux of servant leadership there. And this is really one of the main theories beyond followership that really does put followers first. So all other theories that we've talked about at this point, whether we've intentionally said it or not really pointed it out, they have been coming from the stance of even if followers are involved, leaders still have this motive or goal that they're trying to accomplish. And so they're still leading in a way to get what they want. And servant leadership says, no, honestly, if you're a servant leader, if you ascribe to servant leadership, it doesn't matter what you want at all. It's all about what your followers want. What ethical theory is that connected to? If you do what's best for others and not for yourself. Again, we have 3 ethical theories. You can either do what's best for you, what's best for most, or best for others. Which one is all about what's best for others? Altruism. So servant leadership is rooted in altruism as an ethical theory. This idea that servant leadership is going to put what's best for everyone else in front of what the leader wants. Okay, so know those connections. Know that, again, servant leadership's connected to this idea of referent power, and that's how it can be about both service and influence. And then it's rooted in altruism as an ethical theory. Okay. Another important thing, and it's on the bottom of this slide, I don't expect y'all to know this big, long definition of servant leadership. But I'll read it out loud for y'all. Greenleaf is like the main dude that started researching this. And so if you were to go to the library today, you could look up books about servant leadership, and they're probably going to be books by Greenleaf, right? Everybody kind of goes back to him. He says that servant leadership begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve first. Then conscious choice brings one to aspire to lead. The difference manifests itself in the care taken by the servant. First, to make sure that other people's highest priority needs are being served. The best test is, do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become a servant? And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Will they benefit, or at least will they not be further deprived? Take a second to think about that definition. What are some pieces that stand out to you that you find interesting? Or what's different about it than some of the other definitions of leadership we've had this semester? So I'll point out one difference while y'all are still thinking on it. In the very first sentence, it says that how servant leadership comes about is because people choose to serve first rather than to lead first. It's almost like the leadership part just happens because they've been serving, not because they asked for it. Why is that an important distinction? I might have to make y'all stand up and do jumping jacks. Make sure y'all are awake today. Do you think people who are in leadership roles, can y'all think of anybody who you would say, we now view them as a leader because they chose to serve, versus they're in a position or were named a leader and so we view them as a leader? Can you think of anybody?
Mother Teresa.
Yes, Bailey Hyde. No. Sorry. But yes, Mother Teresa. Do you think Mother Teresa set out to be a leader? She was just serving. But because of what she did and her ability to put others first, we now view her as a leader. Another example, who would y'all say? Huh? Bob Goff. How so?
I mean, he was just really nice to people, and he was a lawyer and wanted to make a difference, and then he got asked to write books, and he's a world-renowned speaker because he just loved people.
Yeah, he just kind of went with the mission of, I'm going to just love people and love them well and be happy. I think that's the other thing. He's just a joyful person. And then that kind of became contagious. Yeah, it spread. So that's one of the first signs. What else about this definition is different than some of our other definitions of leadership or some of our other theories?
I guess like,
You can-
something that stands out to me, like, I don't know if it's really that different from other things, but the natural feeling, like that, the natural feeling that one wants to serve, I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, there's not extrinsic or intrinsic rewards or motivation really tied to it. I would say intrinsic motivation, but it is this like, the servant leader doesn't need people poking and prodding them to do it. They're just going to do it. It's just natural. It is part of who they are. It goes a little bit back to this idea of maybe it is a trait of theirs. Some people are just more servant-minded than others, perhaps. But yeah, it's natural. Do any of our other theories, when we define what the theory is, does it tell us how to test it? So like it gives us a definition that this is what transformational leadership should be. This is what authentic leadership should be. But does it give us like some tangible examples to really see if it happens or not? Not really. So how do we tell if servant leadership is happening? Comes after the sentence, the best test is. What are some of those things? Put them in your own words.
Asking the followers?
Asking the followers, absolutely. So like if you see a leader who's actually asking the followers, seeing what's going on, that's a good way to see it. Another thing though is it talks here too about the people who are being served, so the followers. Are they becoming healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous? It makes a clear distinction that this type of service is not manipulation. So any of y'all in here ever learned about the Enneagram? Any of y'all a 2 on the Enneagram? Okay. Bailey, what is one of the cruxes of being a 2?
It's usually like you care too much or you are willing to be stepped all over.
And then what happens too? What can happen if a 2, so a 2 is called a helper. They like to serve people. They put other people's needs above their own. But if they're not in a healthy place, a 2 can also start getting to where they do these things for people expecting stuff in return. And then they get upset that other people aren't giving and doing the same amount that they are. That's kind of a form of manipulation. And so this definition of servant leadership is saying we're not serving because we're expecting something out of it. We're serving because we truly want to benefit the followers, the people who are receiving this service. And so when you walk away from them, their lives should be better. Their situations should be better. They shouldn't be dependent on you. But that also doesn't mean that you don't serve. I do think sometimes people are hesitant to serve because we're very individualistic in our mindset, and we say, well, if we give them stuff or we do stuff with them, they're going to be dependent on me for it. Not if you serve them in a way that helps them grow and develop as a human. So again, just an important part. And what you'll see from our standpoint is that we're looking at servant leadership as a behavior, not as a trait. So we're not saying this is who a leader is. We're not saying who is a servant leadership. We're saying, what does servant leadership act like? Okay, the difference between those two things there. So there's really 10 characteristics, which is interesting. We just said we're looking at it as a behavior, but then they call it characteristics in the book. So I love it when they contradict themselves. But if we look at what these characteristics are, they actually are behaviors. 10 of them that we say embodies servant leadership. Okay? We'll start with the first one. We're going to briefly go through these because you have kind of the explanation of what all 10 of these are in your notes. And some of them are pretty straightforward. But servant leadership's happening if listening is going on. Leaders and followers, organizations are listening to each other. They're acknowledging their viewpoints and they're validating those perspectives. So I would put beside there, it's an active form of listening. It's not passive. It's not just some routine you're going through to be able to say, hey, I sat and listened to what they had to say. No, you genuinely listened, you took heart, you thought about it. Maybe there was more interaction that involved with it. So active listening. Servant leadership involves empathy. Okay? To be in someone else's shoes. We talked a little bit about this last time. Difference between empathy and, what's the word I'm thinking of? Just left my brain. We'll come back to it. But being able to stand in one's shoes. Okay? And that means that you've listened well enough that you can try to see the world from their perspective. What do y'all think about this statement? A lot of recent research on millennials and Generation Z states that empathy is the one thing that is lacking most among our generation. What would y'all agree or disagree with that?
I think it makes sense. I feel like with like, and I'm not just dogging on phones or whatever, but like taking like the human aspect out of a lot of communication because it's so digital. Like we don't understand how to read people's like body emotions as much. Like I don't know.
Talking about paradoxes, those same generations, millennials and Generation Z, are also said to be more tolerant generations. So how can these generations be tolerant yet lack empathy? Is tolerance being empathetic or not? What's the difference? How many of y'all avoid conflict or hard conversations when you know you disagree with somebody? But we'll say everyone has the right to their own opinion, right? That's the idea of tolerance. Everybody has the right to their own idea. But then when it comes to putting yourself in their shoes, we're not going to step that far. That's the difference between tolerance and empathy. And so we're looking for empathy in servant leadership. Healing. It's this idea that you're going to help people become better. If they have struggles, if there's things going on, you're going to be a healer. You look at people as a whole. Okay? I know that sounds really fluffy, but think about, again, this idea of conflict resolution. Can you walk away from a situation thinking that a conflict is solved and yet people are still hurt? Yes. Servant leadership is going to try to avoid that. Once resolution's been reached, the hope is that people walk away still feeling healed, feeling whole, and not holding grudges, not feeling hurt. Then we have awareness. And awareness, again, you're seeing some ties to emotional intelligence here. This idea of understanding yourself and how you impact other people. Self-awareness, add a little bit of self-regulation to it. Okay. Then we move to persuasion. That's number 5 for us. What do y'all think persuasion means? Why would servant leadership have persuasion? What is persuasion? Any of y'all had to write a persuasive speech before? What is a persuasive speech?
Getting people to do something that you want them to do.
Getting people to do something or think something that you want them to think. It's an argument, right? Like you're trying to convince them to agree with your argument. There is some sense of persuasion in servant leadership, but this is done in a gentle, non-judgmental way. So again, we're admitting that there is some form of influence that's happening through servant leadership. It's not just all lovey-dovey, altruistic all the time, but because of that referent power that servant leadership has, they're still able to persuade others. Okay? Conceptualization is the ability to be a visionary. So just, again, kind of seeing the big picture, kind of like putting a puzzle together, right? Concepts, putting concepts together, conceptualization. And foresight is a little bit different. Conceptualization is more of visions. So if we were going to write a vision statement for an organization, we want someone that has strong conceptualization. But foresight is then having the ability to predict what's going to happen in the future based on what's happening right now. So these people not only can see how all the pieces of the puzzle fit together, but they understand enough of the context and things that might happen in the future that they can kind of plan or predict ahead of time. Stewardship, servant leadership, means that they care. When we say stewardship, we use that a lot when it comes to environmental stewardship, agricultural stewardship. What is stewardship? What are we meaning when we use that word?
Taking a proactive approach to like your surroundings, I guess, and like relationships.
Taking a proactive approach and caring, right? So it's a proactive, caring approach to what's going on. Then we have commitment to the growth of people. So we saw this, again, kind of talked about in the definition. Servant leadership wants to see people as unique individuals. So if leaders and followers see each other as unique, a little bit of LMX there, right? With that one-on-one relationship and having high quality relationships. And it's seeing that every person has value and something to bring to the table. And then finally, servant leadership is going to be all about building community. So it is not individualistic in the least. Although leaders and followers value each other individually, it's really about building the community. And so it's interesting, servant leadership has been shown to be one of the theories and approaches to leadership that has actually been the hardest for our particular culture to adopt. Why might that be? We talk about it and say we want servant leadership, but why might it be hard in practice for our culture to follow?
I think a lot of people are selfish and they don't like, you brought up with like, they're very just one-minded and they don't really see other people's like point of view or anything, so they're not really willing to see other sides or take other people into consideration because they only care about themselves.
Yeah. Again, it goes back a little bit to that egoism, ethical egoism of what's best for me. And because servant leadership is altruistic, it's going to focus on doing what's better for everyone else. It is this idea about being part of something that's greater than yourself. Understanding that sometimes you might have to sacrifice a little bit if it's for the greater good. And that's okay to servant leadership because that's the goal. It puts followers first. All right. 10 characteristics there of a servant leader. Erin, will you pass this up for me? So to help us dig a little bit deeper into maybe how, again, if we were to step into an organization and try to figure out if servant leadership is happening, we would want to look for these 10 behaviors. To help us kind of practice doing that, we're going to do something a little bit different today. We're going to listen to a song. Okay? And these are the lyrics. Erin's passing it out for you. And what I'd like for you to do is while you're listening to the song, I want you to identify parts of the lyrics that maybe relate to one of the 10 characteristics. All right? So can you see, is there anything in the lyrics that talk about empathy? Is there anything in the lyrics that talk about stewardship? Let's see how many of the 10 you can identify in the songs. Thank you. And on the side note, this is my favorite band, selfishly. Not very servant leadership of me, but they're better acoustic, so y'all are getting the acoustic version today. And of course, after the ad plays.
At the ASPCA, we give a voice to the voiceless. We fight for those who can.
I were listening to our dog conversation.
Light in the crack, the one that's bending the camel's back, slow to hang, quick to laugh, be more hard and less attack. Be the wheel, not the track, be the wonder that's coming back, leave the past right where it's at. Be more hard and less one that's in the gap. Be the never turning back. Twice the heart any man can have. Be the wheel, not the track. Be the wanderer that's coming back. Be the path right where it's at. Be more heart and less attack. Be more heart and less attack.
So we've listened through it once. If you made some notes, what I'd like for you to do is find someone to pair up with, and I want y'all to compare what lyrics did you identify match up with some of the characteristics of servant leadership. I'm going to play the song through one more time, and that'll be how much time I'd like for y'all to chat in your pairs. All right? Find someone to compare notes with. Give you the good version now. The radio version now.
This band do a song called like
Yep.
I remember that song. Oh yes, that time of year. Yeah.
I've seen them in concert 12 times. It's really bad. And the best one, they did a whole acoustic show in Atlanta, and there were only like 70 people.
Oh wow, that's cool.
It was the singer Bear is probably one of the most talented singers. He's so good. But it makes me feel old, like they just came out with a new album in July, and I was looking back, and like they came out when I was in high school, and they're the only band I own every single CD to, and I was like, y'all have this many albums? I'm so old. Well, that's what, like, I'm like, oh, this song isn't that old, but it's like 2 albums ago. Like,
I was like so much more into music in high school because I used to go to like shows all the time because I lived so close to Nashville that it was so easy to get to that was really listening.
I love music.
Yeah, we're all bowling,
I don't know, it's just like,
Hey, at least your favorite band is still together.
Well, kind of, sort of. So, started out 4. One guy left after he had kids, and then 2 of them are brothers, and the brother just left before their recent album came out. So there's still 2 original people, but it's fine. They're still great. They just had some personnel changes over the years.
Yeah.
Try
You saying that makes me think of like Oasis. It's like, yeah, the brothers have personality.
The brother was like the main guitarist, and he's very creative. Like he does art on the side too, and it was kind of the same thing with his family and kids. He's just like he actually lives in Nashville, and now he's just pursuing his art and stuff.
It's
But
interesting, like, to see like musicians like get older, like have kids, and be like, okay, I guess I don't want to do this anymore.
yeah, like all of their album covers up until this point, that brother created them and stuff like that.
Trying to relate the best you can. Have them celebrate that. Don't be an idiot, I guess.
I think also
I stuck my
How's your mom?
I drank the water. I felt my veins part. I'm living safe, but I'm living broken. I'm down the hill. I'm living broken. I stuck my
I love that. It's not like that. But like now that I'm planning one, it's like oh my gosh. I'm glad it was in this.
All right, so have every group share with me at least one of the lyrics that y'all discussed in your pairs and the particular characteristic of servant leadership you felt like it exemplified. And we'll start over here with you guys.
One of the ones that we got down here would be the wheels and not the track, to be a commitment to the group of people. Like the
Ooh.
track will lead you there, but the wheels will be what leads, like, kind of gets in there.
Yeah, and it's sustaining. It's constant movement, right? I like that. I really like that analogy there. What about y'all up here?
Here, I'll talk to yours in your voice. You want to do the slow to anger quick clap. So that one stood out to us as like a really good example of like listening and like being present with people. Bailey made a really good point about.
Yeah, I like that. Slow to anger, quick to laugh. And not having to do with listening. All right, in the back.
we didn't leave the past right where it's at as healing, because you do have to like leave the past sometimes to like grow.
Yeah, and it's the only way to move forward, right? And sometimes to get past hurt. That's a really good one. So if y'all didn't hear them, leave the past right where it's at. An example of healing. Okay. What about in the back? Brienne?
We said twice the heart any man can have is empathy.
Ooh, why?
Well, because empathy is caring for other people, and being invested in them, and so I feel like when you're saying that you have twice the heart that any man can have, you have a bigger heart, you're more open to that, and you feel empathy for other people.
Great example. Yes. Okay. What did y'all discuss?
So we had some that are pretty similar to everyone else's, but the one that stuck out to us the most would be leave the past right where it's at, and that we put healing for that.
Yeah, very good. Yes. And what about y'all?
One of the ones that we did was, because it's you in the mirror staring back, is awareness.
Yes. I was waiting for it. Why did y'all say that represented awareness?
Just because, like, being aware of yourself, kind of, you're staring at yourself in the mirror.
Yeah, very good. So we've had listening, empathy, healing, awareness, commitment to the growth of people. Did y'all identify any lyrics that maybe had to do with building community?
I feel like I stuck my head out. I caught the raindrops. Could be like if you're willing to help people in situations, just like keeping your hat out and helping others.
Absolutely. Again, kind of putting those needs first and out there. What about stewardship?
One that stuck out to me was the wanderer that's coming back, because, like, when I think of stewardship, like I said, it's like, man, I'm sorry, I keep blanking out on my answers today. Never mind.
There you
It's
go.
in there somewhere. I just.
Yeah. No, but this idea of caring, so like you wander away, but you still come back because you care. I could completely see that. Anything about conceptualization or foresight, being able to see the big picture or predict what's going to happen, anything like that in the lyrics?
Leave the past by where it's at. We kind of got foresight for that one. I kind of don't
Yeah.
dwell on things, just keep going.
Like you understand where you're at and why you're there, but you don't sit on it
Yeah.
for a long time. So yeah, that's a great additional interpretation to that same lyric. What about persuasion? How could the lyric be more heart and less attack? Be the type of persuasion we're looking for in servant leadership.
Not be so harsh to like have a home.
Yeah, it's not harsh arguments. It's not that you're trying to get people to side with you because you're a bully. It's in a caring, nurturing, non-judgmental way. And so this idea of more heart, less attack. Any of y'all heard this song before? A few people. Came out in 2014. I think it very much is a song that kind of could maybe provide some healing right now with how things are. We could all be a little bit more heart, less attack. And I think that's really what servant leadership is calling and asking for, that's kind of how we lead others, is with that mindset versus always being attacking and hurtful. Any other last thoughts about the song?
What did we say for stewardship?
For stewardship, be the wanderer that's coming back. So this idea of caring. Mm-hmm. I think too, you talked about foresight, quick to let go, slow to react. Could be another one that lines up with that. And then interesting, this idea of commitment to the growth of people or building community. That second line says, be the one that's there on a camel's back. When we use that phrase, like the straw broke, right? What do we mean? What are we typically saying is happening? It's like, what broke the straw on the camel's back, right? It's like the last worst thing could happen. But if you want to be there on the camel's back, what do you think they mean by that? A little bit of empathy, a little bit commitment to people and community. You're kind of there to catch people when they fall. So when things do kind of hit the fan or the straw breaks, right, you're there for them. Interesting analogy there. Any of y'all, maybe I'm the only nerd in the world, but y'all listen to songs or watch movies and it makes you think of things you've learned? Maybe it's just me. But I hope this is kind of a good exercise and again, another good example of how we can take things that are all around us and relate it back to what we're learning about servant leadership and about some of our other leadership theories. Again, y'all can do this and get extra credit in the class for this. You just have to post it in the discussion board for class. And that has to be done before Thanksgiving break. So just like keep that in your mindset. If you hear a song on the radio, if you see a movie clip and you're like, oh my gosh, this particular person shows 5 of the 10 servant leadership characteristics, post it and tell us about it. That's all you've got to do. How can kind of identifying these characteristics of servant leadership in a song help you do a better job of assessing whether servant leadership is happening around you? Is it always going to be straightforward? No. And you got to kind of look for it, don't you? So again, we tend to think servant leadership is a leader who just likes to serve other people, but it's really about these other behaviors that are happening and seeing, do the followers have this sense of community with each other? Do they seem committed to each other? Are they aware? Do they have empathy? Right? And so you've got to look a little bit deeper for those particular things. The last thing that I want to point out is that how this idea of servant leadership has become a theory is that we've actually developed this model that if, again, when we go into an organization, go into a group of people and see these things, we can predict whether it's happening or we can assess at what level it's happening. When we say something is antecedent conditions, we're saying that these are things that need to be considered before you start looking at the behaviors of people. And so you've got to really understand the context and culture of an organization. You do need to know some of the attributes of the leader. And the reason for that is, again, we're looking at things like morality and ethics, if they're there, to make sure that servant leadership is the process that's going on. And then we're looking at follower receptivity. Do you think that all followers want to be led by someone who's considered a servant? Why not? Why are you shaking your head now?
It's never 100% absolute.
Yeah. Nothing is 100% absolute. Why might someone not want to be led by a servant leader?
I think servant leaders usually put other people above themselves and hear everyone's point of view. And some people just want to get the job done. They don't really care about others, so they probably look like a servant leader.
There are some who would argue that would say servant leadership sounds great and good, but it has no place in the workplace. Could you see why someone would say that? They would say, decisions got to be made. Again, kind of this utilitarian idea of sometimes people are going to get hurt. Sometimes things aren't going to go well, but I need a leader who's going to make decisions. I don't care kind of who benefits and who doesn't from that. And so that could be one reason. And so we do have to understand that not all, if you're a person that you kind of grab onto this theory and you're like, this is how, if I'm in a leadership position, I hope to lead. I hope to lead by my service. You've got to understand not everyone's going to like that. And not everyone's going to be receptive to it. And so you don't want to call an organization a failed servant leadership organization if they didn't really want it to begin with. Does that make sense? So you got to understand that's going on. And then taking those 10 characteristics of servant leadership, these are specific behaviors we look for. Again, conceptualizing, healing, putting other people first, helping followers. So this idea of the commitment to the growth of people, behaving ethically, empowering other people. So again, this idea that when you leave, they're better off and aren't dependent, and then creating value for the community. And what we know and what our research has shown us is that when organizations are functioning under servant leadership, it's not just the leader who kind of has this mindset of putting followers first. It becomes contagious. That when you are being led by someone who puts others first, you tend to, over time, start putting others first too. So this idea of service can be shared, it can become a shared value. And so because of that, in these organizations, follower performance and growth tend to just exponentially grow. The performance of the organization grows. And it's very different than some of the things we talked about with behavior theory. This idea of task and relationship and what's going to have the most output and be the most productive. Servant leadership is saying, we don't need to talk about task and relationship. We need to talk about whether we're putting other people in our organization first or not. And we're probably still going to get a really good organizational outcome just by simply doing that, rather than worrying about whether our leader is task or relationship oriented. And then we ultimately see these organizations start to have more of a societal impact. So rather than just being focused on their bottom line and what they're producing, while that's good and they're providing for the people, they tend to start having more of an outward approach to the world than just being focused on themselves. And so that's where you start to see these companies doing a lot of community service or caring more about the products that they build and its impact beyond just, again, what they cost, what revenue they make, what have you. Can you think of any organizations that kind of based off of this model you might say would be a servant leadership based organization? That they're high performing followers, people like working there, they develop well, and then they also have a positive impact on society around them. Any examples? Think of the Kellogg Foundation. What does Kellogg make? Cereal. Different items like that. Like they're a food-based company, right? Are they known for having a societal impact? They're very philanthropic. They sponsor a lot of things. They give a lot. They're part of a lot of different initiatives, whether it's sustainability, health, you name it, right? And over the years, they've seen internally a shift towards a servant leadership-based model that's being used there. Any other business you can think of that tends to have a big impact on its community? Maybe you don't know about the organizational performance, but you're like, from an outsider's perspective, I feel like they're making a societal impact.
Not so much anymore, but Chesapeake Energy used to give to schools all the time in Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm. And oftentimes businesses like that, they're doing it beyond just doing it for a tax write-off, right? They're giving way more than they even need to or are expected to sometimes. Yeah. And so that's what kind of where servant leadership is at right now as far as how it's being studied, is looking at, okay, what makes some of these businesses be more, I would call it civic minded or community minded and giving. And oftentimes what they're finding is that within the organization, there tends to be this process of servant leadership happening that, again, is just kind of becoming contagious among the people. And again, I think the biggest thing is it's getting people to think beyond themselves, or getting an organization to think beyond themselves. So, some strengths about it. We like the fact that compared to some of the other theories we've talked about, this one does focus on altruism, because mostly everything else we've talked about is either kind of rooted in egoism, that people are going to kind of revert back to the idea they're going to do what's best for them. That's kind of that transformational leadership side that can get a little hard, is that because we put that leader on a pedestal, we have to be careful, because it would be really easy for them to focus on just what they want. Or we have that utilitarianism, which is do what's best for the most people, we tend to think of that kind of connected a little bit sometimes with authentic leadership. But servant leadership is all about altruism, encouraging altruism, and really being the focus of how decisions are made, right? It's about leaders sharing control, but I would even say before that, it is putting followers first. And again, this idea that people are serving because it's natural to them. They're not serving because they're expecting to become a leader out of it. Right? And again, there's a really sound measurement that we can use, again, just instrument, that if you were wanting to do research in it, we know it works. So compared to some other theories that like sound good but are hard to test, servant leadership is actually pretty easy to study and pretty easy to test. But some criticisms of it is, even though we can test it, some people still think it's kind of whimsical. Why might they think servant leadership isn't really leadership? What is so different about this theory?
Because you're not really leading people, you're helping people.
Yeah, it's people helping people. It's not about leading. And so some are like, shouldn't we just call it service? Why are we calling it servant leadership? But again, because we recognize, because people are servants, we then tend to allow them to have referent power over us. There is a form of influence, which makes it part of us studying the leadership process. Okay? Again, some people would say this idea of putting others first is prescriptive, that we're telling people what to do. And again, you have some researchers who they don't want to pull ethics and morals into things because they feel like that's getting down a realm that's not objective, and research should be objective. But I would counter them to say leadership deals with people, and people are subjective, and so I am fine with there being research and study in leadership that's subjective. We're dealing with human beings. Okay? Any thoughts about servant leadership? Now that you've learned about transformational, authentic, and servant leadership, which of the three do you feel like you like more than another at this point? Why so?
It's giving those context and like actual applicable information that it gives out these guidelines to what each of those mean. Authentic and servant leadership, I feel like it's just up to the discretion of the followers and leader relationship.
Okay. So again, kind of a little bit more subjective. And again, transformational leadership, it gives us the 4 eyes. You look for those things. If they're not there, then probably transactional leadership's happening. A little bit easier to dissect. Somebody else. How are you comparing the 3 in your head?
I think it's gonna be easy for me to get transformational and authentic leadership confused. But if I think like the intra and interpersonal authentic leadership, but like servant leadership is pretty cool because it's in my mind very different from those two.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how I'm gonna separate the 3.
Yeah. Again, you can kind of take servant leadership and say it's not about leadership, quote unquote, right? It's about putting others first. Again, authentic leadership focused on being genuine. Transformational is very much focused on influence. Okay, so you can kind of see a little bit that if we were to just simply take that line of like, how do these theories approach leaders' influence on others? Transformational leadership tends to lie a little bit more along that idea of like, we need to be charismatic, idealized influence, inspirational motivation. Again, it's up to the leader to be transformative and to influence others. Authentic leadership would say, well, the way that we influence others is by being genuine, being ourselves. Servant leadership would say the way we influence others is by serving them. See those 3 differences? So, all right, so those are our main 3 influential theories that we're going to focus on. What we're going to pick up on Thursday with Before class, make sure you complete the quiz. The quiz is over, authentic leadership and servant leadership. But we're going to take a little, it's going to feel like a little bit of a turn, and we're going to start talking about culture and gender in leadership. So I hope throughout class I've posed some questions to y'all periodically about like, how does this relate to our culture? Can this be true for everyone or not? Or, you know, what that, we're going to get a little bit deeper into some of that, because if we don't, it's going to be hard to see where the future of leadership theory is going. And that's what we'll kind of talk about after Thanksgiving break. Okay? All right. See y'all Thursday.